Second, I was standing at the top of the basement stairs, reaching for the light switch, and the next second I was falling. Not the slow movie kind of falling where everything goes quiet and graceful, the real kind, fast, violent. My hip hit the third step from the bottom, and the sound it made. I still hear it sometimes, late at night when the house is too quiet. I lay there on the cold concrete floor for what must have been 40 minutes, maybe longer. I couldn't tell. The light above the washing machine was on, that single bare bulb I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years, and I stared at it and talked myself through breathing. In, out. Don't panic. Someone will come. No one came. I had my phone in my cardigan pocket. My daughter had made me start carrying it everywhere after my husband passed 2 years ago this coming March. I pulled it out with shaking hands and called her first. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I tried my son-in-law. Nothing. I lay there on that basement floor and listened to the furnace running, and eventually I called 911, which is what I should have done first, but when you spent 67 years believing your family would show up, it takes a moment to accept that they won't. My name is Vivian, though most people who've known me long enough call me Viv. I was a high school English teacher for 31 years in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. I raised 2 daughters in the house my husband and I bought in 1987 for $94,000, the house where they learned to ride bikes in the driveway and fought over the bathroom and brought home friends I fed without counting how many mouths there were. I retired at 62. My husband Gerald, the name from the file. I'll use a different one. My husband passed after a short illness, and I stayed in that house because leaving felt like erasing him. My older daughter. I'll call her by what she is to me now. She is my daughter, or she was. She and her husband moved to Phoenix 6 years ago for his work. My younger one stayed closer, 40 minutes away in Dublin, Ohio. But closer stopped meaning what I thought it meant a long time before I fell down those stairs. The paramedics were kind. One of them, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, held my hand while they loaded me onto the stretcher and told me I was going to be okay. I believed him more than I believed my own children at that point, and I had known him for 4 minutes. The hospital called my older daughter 11 times while I was in surgery. 11 times. I found out later from the nurse who had become my unofficial advocate by day 2. A sharp woman named Phyllis, who had clearly seen everything in her 20 years on that floor and had run out of patience for adult children who didn't answer phones. 11 calls. They left 3 voicemails. They'd tried my son-in-law's number, which I had listed as a secondary contact. Twice. Nothing. I came out of the hip replacement surgery at 6:43 in the evening. I know the exact time because the clock on the wall was the first thing I focused on when the anesthesia started lifting, and the second thing I focused on was the fact that there was no one in the chair beside my bed, no coat draped over the back of it, no coffee cup on the side table, no daughter, no son-in-law, no younger daughter who lived 40 minutes away. There was Phyllis checking my IV line, and there was the television mounted high on the wall with the sound turned low, and there was me. I asked Phyllis if anyone had come. She paused just long enough before she answered that I understood everything I needed to understand before she said a single word. She told me they had been trying to reach my family. She told me she was sure they'd be there soon. She said it the way people say things they don't quite believe but feel obligated to offer, like when someone tells you the traffic wasn't that bad when clearly it was. My son-in-law called at 9:17 that night. I was still groggy, still trying to piece together where I was and why my hip felt like it had been replaced with something that hadn't quite settled into place yet, which of course it had. He told me he was so sorry that they had been at a concert, that their phones were on silent, that they hadn't seen the calls until they got back to the hotel. The hotel. I asked him where they were. He said Scottsdale. A work event, he said. A conference. Important client dinners. My daughter got on the phone after him. She said, "Mom, we're so sorry. We didn't know. We would have come if we'd known." And I lay there in that hospital bed with a new titanium hip, and I said, "I know, sweetheart," because that is what I had spent 67 years training myself to say. I did not ask her why her phone was on silent for 11 calls. I did not ask why a concert mattered more than being reachable when her 71-year-old mother lived alone and had explicitly been told by her cardiologist 6 months earlier to be careful with stairs. I said, "I know," and I said, "I'm okay," and I said, "We'll talk when you're home." And then I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and let myself feel, for the first time in a very long time, exactly how alone I actually was. My younger daughter came the next morning. She arrived at 8:30 with a coffee for herself and nothing for me because she hadn't thought about it. She said she was just rushing to get there. She sat in the chair beside my bed for 2 hours and spent most of it on her phone. When I asked if she could stay and help when they discharged me, she said she'd have to check with her husband about the kids' schedules. She said it like I had asked her to rearrange something minor, like I had asked to borrow a dish. She left by 11. She gave me a hug that felt like an obligation being completed. I watched her go, and I thought about the night she was born, how I had sat in a rocking chair with her for hours because she wouldn't sleep unless someone was holding her, and how I had not once, not for a single second, considered putting her down. They discharged me on day 5 with a walker and a list of instructions and a referral to an outpatient physical therapy program. My older daughter and son-in-law flew back to Phoenix on day 3. They had sent flowers, a big arrangement with lilies and something tropical I didn't recognize, which arrived the morning of day 2 and which I looked at from my bed and felt nothing about whatsoever. A neighbor, Bet, 74 years old, arthritic knees, drives a 10-year-old Buick. Bet came and got me from the hospital. She had driven herself 40 minutes each way. She had brought a casserole dish she was keeping warm in a bag and a small bottle of the sparkling grape juice I had mentioned once at book club. She helped me up the front steps with more patience and steadiness than either of my daughters had offered across the entire week. I will not forget that. I will never forget that. The physical therapy was 3 times a week. Bet drove me to the first 4 sessions before I was cleared to drive myself. We didn't talk about it as a big thing. She just showed up. That's the difference I've come to understand between people who love you and people who love the idea of you from a comfortable distance. It was during the 3rd week of PT on a Tuesday afternoon when I got home and decided to look at my older daughter's social media. I don't do this often. I find it disorienting, seeing someone's curated highlight reel when you know the parts they leave out. But I was tired, and my hip ached, and I had been thinking about her all day for reasons I couldn't quite articulate, the way you sometimes think about someone when something is quietly wrong. She had posted 3 times during the week I was in the hospital. The first post was a photo of a dinner table, candles, wine glasses, a charcuterie board that must have cost $60. She had written, "Grateful for this one," and tagged her husband. It had been posted at 7:48 p.m. on the night of my surgery. I sat with that for a moment, grateful for this one. At 7:48, my surgery had started at 4:30. The hospital had been calling them for hours. The second post was a photo from the concert. Both of them dressed up, laughing. The stage lit up behind them in blue and gold. She looked happy. She looked the way she used to look when she was 22, and the world still felt full of open doors. I had worked 2 extra years before retiring to help them pay off their credit card debt when they first moved to Phoenix. I had written the check without being asked and without expecting anything in return because she was my daughter, and that's what you do. The third post was a reel of the Scottsdale Resort pool. Sunday morning. Breakfast beside the water. One more day in paradise. Post at 10:06 a.m., which was approximately 45 minutes before my son-in-law had finally called to check on me. I closed the app. I set my phone face down on the kitchen table. I sat there in the silence of my house for a very long time. Here is what I want to be honest about, because I think it matters. I was not entirely surprised. That's the part that actually broke something open in me, not the posts. Not even the 11 unanswered calls. What broke me open was realizing I had known on some level for years. I had known, and I had explained it away, and I kept sending birthday money and making their guest room up with fresh sheets and calling every Sunday, even when they didn't call back, and telling myself that's just how busy young people are today. That's just the distance. That's just the phase they're in. I had spent years making a smaller and smaller version of myself to fit inside the space they had available for me. I called my financial advisor the following week. Her name is not important, but she has been advising me since before my husband passed, and she knows our situation well. I told her I wanted to understand my options. I had the house, which was paid off. I had my husband's pension and my teacher's pension, which together gave me a reasonable monthly income. I had savings. I had what my husband and I had always privately called the inheritance account, money we had set aside with the intention of eventually leaving it to our daughters. I told her I wanted to reconsider the inheritance account. She didn't ask questions. She pulled up the documents and walked me through what I could and couldn't do. I wasn't making an impulsive decision. I was making a decision that I should have been willing to make years ago, but had kept deferring because I thought love required infinite patience, infinite availability, infinite accommodation. It does not. I know that now. I also called a realtor, not because I had decided to sell, not yet, but because I wanted to understand what the house was worth and what my options looked like. The market in my area had been strong. The number she gave me was significantly higher than I had expected, higher than what felt real for a house where I had brought 2 daughters home from the hospital and buried a husband and grown old in the way that happens so gradually. You don't see it until you look at a photo from 15 years ago and feel a little startled by who's looking back. I didn't tell my daughters any of this. About 6 weeks after I came home from the hospital, my older daughter called on a Sunday. We hadn't spoken much. She had texted several times, "Hope you're feeling better. Let us know if you need anything. Thinking of you," which is the modern equivalent of a card with no letter inside. I had responded in kind. "Fine, thanks. Doing well? PT going great." She called to tell me that she and her husband were thinking about buying a bigger house. They had found something they loved in a better school district. Their youngest was starting kindergarten in the fall, and they wanted to get settled before then. They were just a little short on the down payment. She said it casually. The way you say something when you've been building up to it for a while and have decided the best approach is to act like it's not a big ask. She said, "Mom, I know this isn't great timing. We know you've had a rough couple of months. We just wanted to see if maybe, if you were in a position..." I let her finish. I had spent a lifetime not letting people feel the discomfort of their own requests. I let her finish this one. Then I told her no. I told her no calmly. I told her I loved her. I told her I had been doing a lot of thinking about my finances and my future, and I had decided to make some changes. I told her the money she was likely thinking about was no longer going to be available in the way she may have been expecting. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What does that mean?" I told her I was restructuring some things. I said I was thinking about my own needs, my health care, my housing options, my security, and that I had realized I had perhaps not done enough of that thinking over the years. She said, "Mom, this is about the hospital, isn't it?" I said, "It's about a lot of things that have been adding up for a long time. And the hospital is one of them, yes." She said they felt terrible about the hospital. She said they had explained it. The conference, the concert, their phones. I said, "I know. I understand what happened. I also understand that the hospital called 11 times. I also understand that you posted a photo of a charcuterie board at 7:48 on the night I was in surgery." Silence. I said, "I'm not calling to argue about it. I called to tell you that I love you and that I'm making changes to how I manage my life and my finances going forward. I think that's the honest thing to do rather than letting you make plans based on expectations that aren't accurate anymore. She said, "So you're punishing us?" I said, "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. I learned the difference later than I should have. We got off the phone not long after that. She was upset. I understood that. I also understood that her being upset was not, in fact, an emergency that required me to fix it. That was new, that feeling. It felt strange and uncomfortable, and also, underneath that, something that I can only describe as solid. Like I put my foot down on actual ground for the first time in a very long time. I sold the house 4 months later. The number the realtor had given me held up. I found a 55-plus community about 20 minutes from where I'd lived. Good amenities, a book club already in progress, a small garden plot I could tend in the warmer months. Bet lives 12 minutes away. I can drive myself to PT, to church, to the grocery store, to anywhere I want to go. I set aside what I needed for my own care. For the first time in my adult life, I thought about what I might need in 10 years, in 15, if my health changed, if I needed different housing, if the expenses I couldn't predict became the expenses I'd have to face alone. I thought about myself first. It felt radical and it felt right. I donated a significant portion of the inheritance account to a literacy organization in my county. I taught English for 31 years. I believe in what they do. My husband would have liked that choice. I think he would have understood why I made it. I told my daughters I had sold the house and where I was moving. My younger one came to help me pack boxes, which I appreciated. It was the first time in a long while that I felt her actually present, not just physically in the room, but actually there, paying attention, asking about things, which chair had been my husband's favorite, which books did I want in the main room versus in storage. I don't know if something shifted for her or if she was just startled enough by all of it to slow down. Either way, I was grateful. My older daughter and I have talked a few times since then. The conversations are shorter than they used to be, more careful, less pretending. I don't know what we are to each other exactly right now. I know she is my daughter. I know I love her. I know that love does not obligate me to fund a life she has built around my absence. Those 3 things can all be true at once, and for the first time I'm letting them be true at once without trying to resolve the tension into something more comfortable. I'm 67 years old. I live in a bright apartment with good light and a small porch where I drink my coffee in the mornings. I have a book club on Wednesdays. I have Bet, who calls me for no reason, who shows up with soup when it's cold, who once drove 40 minutes each way to pick up a woman she barely knew from a hospital, because that's what you do for people you care about. I have, for the first time in a very long time, stopped making myself smaller to fit inside a space that was never going to get any bigger. Here is what I want to say to anyone listening who recognizes something in this, and I think some of you do, or you wouldn't still be here. The people who will show up for you are not always the people you spend your life showing up for. Sometimes they are. I hope they are for you. But is there not? If you are lying on a concrete floor, literally or otherwise, and you are calling the numbers you always thought you could call and no one is answering, that is information. That is not a reason to call louder or to explain yourself better or to make it more convenient for them to eventually pick up. That is information and you are allowed to use it. It's not too late to stop arranging your life around people who have stopped arranging theirs around you. I know that because I did it at 67 on a new titanium hip in a house I'd lived in for 37 years. If I could do it, you can do it too. Whatever your version of it looks like, that's all. That's the whole story. I just wanted someone to know. I think about Bet a lot, not in a sentimental way, in a clarifying way. She didn't owe me anything. We were neighbors who had become friends through proximity and book club and the kind of slow accumulation of small kindnesses that happens between people who actually pay attention to each other. She drove 40 minutes each way to pick me up from a hospital. She brought sparkling grape juice because she had listened once at a book club meeting when I mentioned offhandedly that I liked it. That's the thing about people who genuinely care. They remember the small things. They don't need a reason to show up. They just show up. My daughter remembered the big things. She remembered birthdays and holidays and the years I helped them financially. What she forgot, somehow, was the part where love is supposed to be a practice, not a transaction. And I think if I'm being honest with myself, really honest, the way you can only be when you're lying in a hospital bed at night with no one in the chair beside you, I have to admit that I taught her some of that. Not intentionally, but I spent so many years absorbing disappointment quietly, explaining away absences, making it easy for her to be less present than she should have been, that I essentially trained her to believe there were no consequences for it. The cause was in me as much as it was in her. That's a hard thing to sit with. What I've come to understand is that wisdom isn't something that arrives all at once. It comes in pieces, usually when something breaks, a hip, an expectation, a relationship you thought was solid. The breaking is what gives you the opening to see clearly. I couldn't see clearly when I was busy being accommodating. I couldn't see clearly when I was rewriting her absences into something more palatable. It took lying on a concrete basement floor and then lying in a hospital bed and then sitting alone at my kitchen table looking at a photo of a charcuterie board posted at 7:48 p.m. on the night of my surgery. It took all of that before I finally let myself see what had been true for a long time. Doing the right thing, I've learned, isn't always soft. Sometimes doing the right thing is telling your daughter that the money she was counting on is no longer available. Sometimes it is choosing yourself, your security, your future, your actual needs, after decades of choosing everyone else first. That is not cruelty. That is not punishment. That is what it looks like when a person finally decides that her life is worth the same care and consideration she spent a lifetime extending to others. And the strength to do it, that didn't come from anger. Anger had been there for a while, and it hadn't moved me anywhere useful. The strength came from being still long enough to understand what I actually wanted the rest of my life to look like. A bright apartment, a porch, coffee in the mornings without waiting for someone to call, a book club on Wednesdays, a friend who drives 40 minutes because that's what you do for someone you love. I'm 67 years old and I've stopped waiting for the version of my daughter I imagined she would be. I love the one she is. I just no longer organize my life around hoping she'll become someone different. That shift, from hoping to accepting, from accommodating to protecting, that is where I finally found something I can only describe as peace. It's not the peace I thought I'd have at this age, but it's real, and it's mine, and no one can take it from me when they don't answer the phone.